I should start this review by mentioning that horror movies is my least favorite genre of film. The reason for that is that, unlike other forms of storytelling, horror relies strongly on getting a reaction from the audience. And the thing about horror getting a reaction out of you is that it rarely works anymore. Every single scare tactic has been done so many times already, and even when it tries to present itself in a subtle way, it's still far too familiar to catch you off guard. Personally, I believe that most effective types of horror come not just from atmosphere and the thought of something constantly trying to kill you, which isn't to say that there aren't movies and video games that still do a good job of this. The most interesting type of horror is that on a psychological level, the one that fully explores the corrupted psyche of the characters and how it impacts the dynamic of the story. And for a horror thriller that emphasizes on psychological-based horror themes and scares, 10 Cloverfield Lane was a pretty entertaining film. Yeah, the sequel to that movie that revolutionized the idea of a story being told by some dick who can't hold the camera still, that provided me with a legitimately entertaining and somewhat scary film. Following the alien attack from the last movie, a woman named Michelle is quickly packing her things to get out of her house and leaves behind her wedding ring, indicating that she's trying to get away from her husband. While on the road, she ends up colliding with another car and she ends up getting knocked out. Later to wake up and discover that she's being chained in an underground bunker. It's soon revealed by her current keeper Howard that there's been an attack on the surface and the Earth is currently uninhabitable. Despite being told this, she tries to escape with the help of another captive named Emmett. That is until it seems that there really is no chance of survival outside the farmhouse. The three try adjusting to life underground and it seems to be going well for them. But then it's revealed that Howard isn't exactly a mentally stable guy. So the two come up with a plan to escape the bunker while figuring out how to deal with Howard and any possible threats waiting for them outside. It's a simple premise for a thriller movie, but the way that it's executed is relatively interesting. The movie seems to have a very strong understanding of being a motion picture. There's plenty of scenes that are carried out with no form of dialogue from the characters, which allows the story to be told from a more visual perspective. One of my favorites is the opening sequence where it slowly pans across the city and inside someone's house, building the prologue with the tone of the music really setting the mood. It keeps the audience in suspense and guessing what's going on rather than pandering to them about what's happening, and it's really good at taking time reeling you into the answers. Just watching the body language and the expressions on Michelle is more than enough to get you invested. The film knows that the atmosphere and the build-up is one of its key strengths, and it sticks to those strengths throughout. Just listening to the tone of the instrumentals as Michelle silently observes her surroundings or thinks about what she's going to do next, it creates an adaptable sense of tension where the audience can look around along with Michelle, and you can actually feel curious about what's going to happen. A very good result of the movie's third-person perspective. Michelle herself is a very well-rounded and satisfyingly independent character, and I'd even say that it's one of Mary Winston's more immersive roles. She's a very smart woman using every possible resource to her advantage, but not only is she resourceful, she is also highly cunning. She never lets her fears get to her and takes time to really think about what situation that she's in, and what she has to do to get out of it safely. She's also extremely observant, closely analyzing her surroundings and remembering smaller details. She has an understandable lack of trust in Howard early on and even in the second act. Her trust in him, while frail at first, slowly develops as it's built upon the harshness of the situation, as she continues to see how dire it is. And when she finally adjusts to him, it doesn't feel like it's just because she has no other choice. She comes to believe that Howard is well-meaning and that the situation has simply made him insecure, considering how he admits to accidentally hitting her car and actually being right about several things. There's also a moment in the film where Michelle is faced with an extremely difficult decision, and even knowing that there was clearly nothing that could have been done about it, she still feels regretful about it, and it reminds her of her own insecurities brought upon by an abusive childhood. All of this is very good establishment for Michelle as a person, showing that she's certainly vulnerable but still vastly intelligent and capable of working around her weaknesses. Emmett is somewhat of the middleman of the film, and it's actually best for him to be that, as it does serve as an important role. He's there as someone for Michelle to relate with as the only other person with a good sense of patience, trying to help Michelle with getting used to her life in the bunker, and even providing her with good company that she can trust. He's also a bit more outspoken, talking in a way that he hopes will put him in Howard's good graces. I can't say there's more to him outside of just being an initial ally for Michelle, but he does have an innocent attitude with a calm method of communication which helps make the connection between them fairly tame. Then you got Howard, who's played exceptionally well by John Goodman. We've always seen him in a cheerfully warm and loving role in many of his films, so seeing him take on a more disturbed portrayal of his acting is pretty interesting. He has a naturally intimidating aura about him, and it's made even more disturbing that you never know exactly what he's thinking. He could be calm one moment, but become aggressive in an instant. And his unpredictability makes his presence feel so much more suspenseful and troubling. What helps add depth to his character is his honesty. Despite having an unstable mind and limited sense of patience, he never directly lies about anything to either Michelle or Emmett. This could be because of his well-meaning hospitality or his attachment to Michelle, but it's certainly a noble trait that shouldn't be overlooked. He has some pretty interesting philosophies which help support his ideals and viewpoints, and they really fit with the tone that the story is going for. But like all psychologically disturbed characters, his welcoming traits never last long. We see plenty of signs later on that he's deeply unsocial given his strong desire to survive, and he becomes highly deluded in the way that he comes to see Michelle as his daughter Megan, and even other young women that unfortunately came along his bunker. He does this to compensate with the loss of his own daughter, which helps to make him sympathetic. And when the time comes for him to be a truly disturbed menace, he has a very intimidating delivery. Goodman portrays a character that has a great mix of being a hospitable caregiver and a scary, unpredictable threat. And it's easily one of the strongest elements of the film. The movie also takes time to make very important establishments. In films like this, it's important to establish ahead of time that characters can do this and that. Otherwise, it'll just come across as an asspull or a bad excuse to progress the plot. There's a moment where Michelle has to stitch Howard's wounds that she herself inflicted on him, and she explains her experience in sewing came from her interest in being a clothing designer. Later on, she uses her experience in clothing design to make a suit meant to protect her from any toxic fumes outside the bunker. And in order to make the suit, she needs the curtains from where they take their showers, and Howard only throws them away in a place where they can reach after he believes that they were contaminated. All of these elements come together in a well-paced manner that did not feel too far-fetched to be possible. Stuff like this occurs several times throughout the movie, and it's always presented in a believable way. The conversations between the three feel very real. They have simple topics to them, but they always talk in a way that feels natural and human. They have this calm narration behind them that makes them appealing to listen to, and they never become repetitive or dragged out. These talks help add character to the cast, and it makes their personalities feel much more fleshed out and three-dimensional. The music is also very good. Because there's a lot of scenes that don't contain dialogue, the film has to rely on visuals and its orchestra to elaborate the scenes. All of the music in the film has a very fitting vibe, containing slow tones, tense beats, slim vibes, subtle pieces, intense releases, and fittingly suspenseful shifts. It helps express the tension in the story, and it's all done very well. It never gets too noisy or too quiet. It stays at just the right volume to feel appealing and fit in the movie right. And the pacing is very well done, taking time to focus on each element for the right amount of time, knowing when to shift to and from different subjects or themes, and never losing focus on what it's supposed to be doing. The cinematography is also pretty good, as it allows the viewers to get a good look of the backgrounds and the environments to feel more involved in the struggles that Michelle is going through. They have good angles and visible establishment. Even in scenes where they take place in a dark room, the visuals still have an appropriate lighting to them so you can easily see what's happening. The atmosphere itself is pretty good too. The movie mostly takes place in a single location, but it has a lot of room in its environment, and it's shot in a way that makes it appealing to get used to. I know that this movie is more of a psychological thriller and not really a horror film, but the way that the concept is presented makes it feel legitimately creepy. Stuck in a bunker with an unstable crazy man who slowly convinces himself that you're his child and becomes extremely possessive of you? That really sounds like a concept for a horror movie. The movie also has a brilliant way of building up the tension and working its way into its more scary moments. It's slow, but it doesn't become boring, and they still find ways for the characters to work off of each other. And because of how well the movie is paced, the scares are more effective at catching you off guard. You know that something is going to happen, but not when it's going to happen. And if you do have an idea of what's going to happen, it comes from an unexpected direction. The scribble scene is a great example of this, where they think that Howard is onto them when he's really just trying to see if they can figure out if it's Santa Claus. This gives you the false security that they're in the clear, but Howard manages to prove that he's smarter than he looks, and forces the two to play into his hand. Stuff like this makes the movie feel like it's truly coming from a scary angle. Not hauntingly scary like there's a serial killer or a monster trying to kill you, but on a more psychological psychological level. Unfortunately, the last 15 minutes do have somewhat of an annoying shift in tone where we're reminded that this is still a sequel to Cloverfield. We go from trying to escape confinement by a disturbed middle-aged man to fighting off aliens. For a movie that mostly established itself as a psychological thriller, this feels like a very, very cartoony shift. That's not to say it doesn't have anything good in it. It still has many of the film's before mentioned strengths, like not relying on dialogue. It still has those great moments of Michelle using her quick wits and slowly building up to the more disturbing moments. And it's also shot in an engaging way. Even the cliffhanger that establishes that there's going to be a third movie doesn't feel out of place or like a cheap cash grab. Given the context of the first two movies overall, it's executed in a way that shows that there is potential in making another movie. I mean, this movie showed us that it is possible to make a good Cloverfield movie, so there's no reason to automatically assume that it won't be promising. I do get the feeling that this movie could have been more active in its execution. Like, say, give more screen time to Edmund and Howard to make them feel more involved in Michelle's story. It also could have been less gimmicky, like have Howard explain straightforward about what's happening instead of just keeping it a secret from Michelle, which would have made the tension stronger and less artificial. But as it stands, 10 Cloverfield Lane is still a pretty good movie. It's one of those scary movies that still has a creepy edge to it no matter how many times you've watched it, with interesting characters and a really good story to boot. If you haven't seen it yet, I say give it a watch. You just might end up enjoying how scared you'll be feeling. MisAnthro Pony, over and out.